The story of Dario Amodei, the man behind AI powerhouse Anthropic. In the heart of San Francisco, on New Year's Day 1983, a child was born who would grow up to fundamentally challenge how we think about artificial intelligence. Dario Amodei entered a world on the cusp of the personal computer revolution, where the idea of machines thinking for themselves still belonged firmly to science fiction. Yet within 4 decades, he would stand at the center of one of the most consequential debates in human history. How do we build artificial intelligence that is not just powerful, but safe? How do we ensure that machines designed to help us don't eventually harm us? These questions would consume his life's work. But Dario's story doesn't begin with artificial intelligence. It begins with a family, a city, and a tragedy that would shape everything that followed. Dario Amodei was born to Riccardo Amodei and Elena Engel in San Francisco, California. His father Riccardo was an Italian-American leather craftsman, a man who worked with his hands and understood the value of patience and precision. His mother Elena, a Jewish American from Chicago, worked as a project manager for libraries. She brought organization and structure to her work, traits that would later manifest in her son's systematic approach to solving problems. For years after Dario's birth, his sister Daniela entered the world. The bond between these siblings would prove extraordinary, eventually leading them to co-found one of the most important artificial intelligence companies of the 21st century. Growing up in San Francisco's Mission District during the 1980s and 90s meant living in a city undergoing radical transformation. The tech boom was just beginning. Companies like Apple and Oracle were reshaping what technology could do. Silicon Valley, just south of the city, was becoming the innovation capital of the world. Young Dario absorbed this atmosphere of possibility, but his interests ran deeper than just technology. He was fascinated by fundamental questions. How does the universe work? What are the laws that govern reality? Why do things behave the way they do? At Lowell High School, one of San Francisco's most academically rigorous public schools, Dario excelled in physics and mathematics. These weren't just subjects to him. They were windows into understanding reality at its most basic level. He loved the elegance of physics, how complex phenomena could be explained by simple, beautiful equations. He loved mathematics for its precision, its lack of ambiguity. In math and physics, there were right answers. The universe followed rules. If you understood the rules deeply enough, you could predict what would happen next. This mindset, this belief in underlying patterns and discoverable laws, would later prove crucial when Dario entered the world of artificial intelligence. But first, he had to build the foundation of knowledge that would carry him there. In 2001, Dario enrolled at the California Institute of Technology, known simply as Caltech. This wasn't just any university. Caltech was where some of the 20th century's greatest physicists had worked and studied. It was an institution that valued depth over breadth, rigor over popularity. At Caltech, Dario worked with Tom Tombrello, a distinguished physicist, as part of the Physics 11 program. This wasn't a typical undergraduate experience. Tombrello pushed his students to think like research scientists, not just memorize facts. He wanted them to ask questions that nobody had answered yet. But after 2 years at Caltech, Dario made a significant decision. He transferred to Stanford University. Why leave one of the world's premier physics programs for another? Those close to him suggest he was seeking a broader intellectual environment, exposure to different ways of thinking. Stanford, located in the heart of Silicon Valley, offered something Caltech didn't. It sat at the intersection of pure science and practical application, of theoretical insight and entrepreneurial energy. At Stanford, Dario completed his undergraduate degree in physics in 2006. But by then, something had shifted in his thinking. Pure theoretical physics, while intellectually beautiful, felt too removed from immediate human concerns. He wanted to work on problems that could directly improve human life. He wanted to understand not just how particles behave, but how living systems work. How does a collection of neurons become a mind? How does biological computation actually happen? This question led him to Princeton University for his doctorate. But he didn't pursue a PhD in pure physics. Instead, he He focused on biophysics, specifically on computational neuroscience and the electrophysiology of neural circuits. He was trying to understand how networks of neurons process information, how they learn, how they adapt. In many ways, this was the perfect preparation for his future work in artificial intelligence. Artificial neural networks, the foundation of modern AI, were originally inspired by biological neural networks in the brain. At Princeton, Dario worked under Professor Michael Berry, whose research focused on neural computation. How do ensembles of neurons encode information? How do they make decisions? How does learning physically happen in biological tissue? These questions required both theoretical insight and experimental precision. Dario had to design experiments, analyze massive amounts of data, build mathematical models that explained what he observed. He was learning to be a scientist in the truest sense. Not just someone who knows things, but someone who can discover new things. Then, in 2006, tragedy struck. Dario's father Ricardo lost his long battle with a rare illness. He was only in his early 50s. The loss devastated Dario. His father had fought the disease for years, enduring treatments that were grueling and often ineffective. What made the tragedy even more painful was timing. Within just 4 years of Ricardo's death, medical researchers developed a treatment that transformed the disease from 50% fatal to 95% curable. This haunted Dario. Someone out there had worked on the cure. They had saved countless lives. But they hadn't worked fast enough to save his father. If the research had progressed just a few years faster, Ricardo might still be alive. This planted something deep in Dario's consciousness. A conviction that speed matters. That when you're working on problems that affect human life and death, every year matters. Every month matters. People die while we're figuring things out. Years later, when Dario would advocate for rapid AI development while simultaneously demanding robust safety measures, this tension, this sense of urgency balanced with caution, would echo his experience with his father's illness. We need to move fast because lives depend on it. But we need to move carefully because mistakes have consequences. Jade Wang, who dated Dario in the early 2010s, later said that his father's passing shaped his entire life path from that point forward. It gave him a sense of purpose, but also a sense of responsibility. He wasn't just pursuing knowledge for its own sake anymore. He was racing against time, trying to develop technologies that could prevent the kind of tragedy his family had experienced. After completing his PhD at Princeton in 2011, Dario did postdoctoral research at Stanford University School of Medicine. He developed new mass spectrometry methods for protein network modeling and biomarker discovery. This was highly technical work at the cutting edge of biology and chemistry. He was learning how to handle enormous datasets, how to find patterns in noise, how to build software that could analyze information faster than any human could. By all accounts, Dario was an exceptional programmer. On his LinkedIn profile, he would later note that he wrote 14,000 lines of code for comprehensive software used by researchers studying proteins, along with over 50 pages of tutorials and documentation. This wasn't just someone who could write code. This was someone who could build complete systems, document them clearly, and make them useful to others. But despite his success in biology, Dario was growing restless. Biological research moved slowly. Experiments took months. Publishing papers took years. Translating discoveries into treatments took decades. He was impatient. He wanted to work on problems where progress was faster, where insights could be applied immediately, where the feedback loop between ideas and results was measured in days, not years. That's when he discovered the world of deep learning and artificial intelligence. In November 2014, Dario joined Baidu, the Chinese technology giant, working in their artificial intelligence division. This might seem like an unusual move for someone with his background. Baidu? Not Google, not a US tech company, but a Chinese search engine? But Baidu had assembled one of the most talented AI teams in the world, led by Andrew Ng, a legendary figure in machine learning who had co-founded Google Brain. When Dario's application arrived at Baidu, the team didn't initially know what to make of him. Greg Amodei, an early team member, later recalled that Dario's background was in biology, not machine learning. Why should they hire him? But then Amodei looked at the code Dario had written during his work at Stanford. He was stunned. Anyone who can write this, Amodei said, has got to be an amazingly good programmer. Dario joined Baidu in November 2014. The timing was perfect. Deep learning was just beginning to show what it could do. In 2012, a neural network had won an image recognition competition by a huge margin, shocking the AI community. It was becoming clear that if you had enough data, enough computing power, and the right architecture, neural networks could learn to do things that had seemed impossible just years before. At Baidu, Dario worked on speech recognition, specifically on a system called Deep Speech 2. The team had vast computing resources and enormous datasets. They could run experiments at a scale that had been impossible just a few years earlier. And they began to notice something remarkable. Something that would change Dario's entire worldview. They found that AI performance improved in a predictable way as they added more computing power, more data, and bigger models. It wasn't random. It wasn't luck. There was a pattern. A law. Performance scaled with resources. Make the model bigger, give it more data, train it longer, and it got better. Consistently. Predictably. This was the emergence of what became known as the scaling laws. And for Dario, seeing this pattern was like a religious experience. Greg Amodei later said, "This was, to me, the most significant discovery I've seen in my life." The team published a paper on speech recognition showing that model size directly correlated with performance. Bigger models weren't just a little better. They were fundamentally more capable. This suggested something profound. Maybe the path to human-level artificial intelligence wasn't some mysterious breakthrough waiting to be discovered. Maybe it was just a matter of scale. Keep making the models bigger. Keep feeding them more data. Keep training them longer. And eventually, they would become as capable as humans. And then surpass us. To this day, Dario Amodei remains perhaps the purest believer in the scaling laws among AI research leaders. While peers like Demis Hassabis at Google DeepMind and Yann LeCun at Meta suggest the industry needs further breakthroughs to reach human-level artificial intelligence, Dario speaks with a certainty, though not complete, that the path forward is clear. Just scale up. The intelligence will come. After his time at Baidu, Dario moved to Google Brain in 2015, working as a senior research scientist. Google had even more resources than Baidu. More computing power. More data. More of everything. Dario continued working on pushing the boundaries of deep learning, particularly in scaling neural networks and making them more reliable. But he was also becoming deeply interested in a problem that most AI researchers were ignoring. Safety. As neural networks got more powerful, they also got more unpredictable. They could do amazing things, but they could also do bizarre things. Generate toxic text. Make confident but completely wrong predictions. Exhibit biases from their training data. As these systems became more capable, the potential for harm grew. What if a highly capable AI system had goals that weren't aligned with human values? What if it was smart enough to deceive us? What if it could cause harm not through malice, but through misunderstanding what we actually wanted? At Google Brain, Dario co-authored a widely cited paper on preventing AI accidents. This work laid the foundation for what would become his life's mission. Making AI safe wasn't just about preventing obvious harms. It was about ensuring that as these systems became more powerful, they remained aligned with human values and human intentions. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. In July 2016, Dario joined OpenAI. OpenAI had been founded in December 2015 by a group that included Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Greg Brockman, Ilya Sutskever, and others. The mission was audacious. Ensure that artificial general intelligence, AGI, meaning AI that matches or exceeds human intelligence, benefits all of humanity. The founders believed AGI was coming, possibly soon. They wanted to make sure it was developed safely and its benefits were widely distributed. When Dario joined OpenAI, he was initially focused on AI safety. But his talents quickly became apparent. He wasn't just a safety researcher. He was someone who understood the entire AI pipeline. The data, the models, the training, the alignment, everything. He rose rapidly through the organization. At OpenAI, Dario became a key figure in shaping the research direction, working closely with Ilya Sutskever, the chief scientist. Together, they championed the scaling hypothesis. The idea that increasing model size and data leads to more capable AI systems. This wasn't just theory anymore. They were about to prove it. In 2019, OpenAI released GPT-2, Generative Pre-trained Transformer 2. It was a language model trained on a massive corpus of text from the internet. And it could do something remarkable. Given a prompt, it could generate coherent, contextually appropriate text that sounded like it was written by a human. The AI community was stunned. This wasn't just pattern matching. This was something that looked like understanding. Dario was intimately involved in GPT-2's development. He led the team responsible for it. But even more significant was what came next. GPT-3. Released in 2020, GPT-3 had 175 billion parameters. It was a monster. And it could do things that seemed impossible. Write essays. Answer questions. Translate languages. Write code. All without being specifically trained for those tasks. It learned to do them just by being exposed to massive amounts of text and learning the patterns. GPT-3 proved the scaling hypothesis. Make the model big enough, give it enough data, and it will develop capabilities you didn't explicitly program. Emergent capabilities. Abilities that arise from scale. This was the future Dario had foreseen at Baidu. It was happening. But Dario was also working on something else at OpenAI. Something that would define his later career. Reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF. The idea was elegant. Instead of just training AI on data and hoping it behaves well, what if humans could directly provide feedback on what outputs were good and which were bad? The AI could then learn not just to be capable, but to be helpful, harmless, and honest. To be aligned with what humans actually wanted. In 2017, DeepMind announced it was collaborating with Dario Amodei, Paul Christiano, and Tom Brown at OpenAI. The goal was to develop methods where AI systems could learn from minimal human feedback. This was crucial. You couldn't have humans evaluate every possible output from an AI system. There were too many possibilities. But if the AI could learn general principles from a small amount of feedback, it could generalize to new situations. Dario and his team recognized that AI safety could be increased if they could avoid having humans write explicit goal functions. Those goal functions, no matter how carefully written, always had loopholes. The AI might technically achieve the goal while doing something completely different from what the humans intended. This was the alignment problem. How do you ensure the AI wants what you want? The result of this research was a learning algorithm that could solve complex reinforcement learning environments with only small amounts of human feedback. It was a breakthrough. And it would become central to how future language models were trained. By 2020, Dario Amodei had reached the peak of his career at OpenAI. He was vice president of research. He led the teams that built GPT-2 and GPT-3, the most advanced language models in the world. He was at the forefront of AI safety research. He was respected throughout the AI community. OpenAI was on the cutting edge of artificial intelligence. But something was bothering him. A growing unease about the direction OpenAI was taking. The tension had been building for years. OpenAI had started as a non-profit with a mission to ensure AGI benefited all of humanity. But as the costs of AI research exploded, billions of dollars needed for computing power and talent, the organization needed more funding. In 2019, OpenAI created a for-profit arm and took $1 billion investment from Microsoft. This was controversial. Was OpenAI betraying its mission? Was it becoming just another tech company, driven by profit rather than safety? Dario watched this transformation with growing concern. It wasn't the Microsoft deal itself that bothered him. He understood the need for resources. What bothered him was a shift in priorities. OpenAI was moving faster and faster toward deploying powerful AI systems. The emphasis was on capabilities, on being first, on capturing market share. Safety research, while still important, felt like it was becoming secondary. There was a group within OpenAI that shared Dario's concerns. They believed two things very strongly. First, that the scaling hypothesis was correct. AI was going to keep getting more powerful as models got bigger. Second, that this made safety even more urgent. You couldn't just scale up capabilities and hope safety would follow. Safety had to be built in from the beginning. It had to be just as much a priority as making the models more capable. But arguing this position inside OpenAI was becoming increasingly difficult. The company had made its strategic choices. Sam Altman, the CEO, had a vision for rapid deployment and iteration. Learn by shipping products. Get feedback from millions of users. Move fast and figure out safety as you go. Dario had a fundamentally different vision. Don't deploy until you're confident the systems are safe. Invest heavily in understanding and mitigating risks before unleashing these tools on the world. Build safety into the architecture from day one, not as an afterthought. Later, when asked why he left OpenAI, Dario would be remarkably candid. Many people assumed it was about the Microsoft deal. That the original OpenAI founders were upset about commercialization. People say we left because we didn't like the deal with Microsoft, Dario said flatly. False. The real reason, he explained, was simpler and more profound. It is incredibly unproductive to try and argue with someone else's vision. OpenAI had chosen its path under Sam Altman's leadership. Those who believed in a different approach needed to build their own organization. Take some people you trust, Dario decided, and go make your vision happen. In December 2020, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Dario Amodei made one of the most consequential decisions of his career. He left OpenAI. And he wasn't alone. His sister Daniela, who had been OpenAI's vice president of policy and partnerships, left with him. So did Jack Clark, who had been OpenAI's policy director. Chris Olah, a renowned researcher in AI interpretability. Tom Brown, Sam McCandlish, and several others. In total, 7 of OpenAI's most senior researchers and leaders walked out the door. This wasn't a typical departure. This was a brain drain of historic proportions. These weren't junior researchers looking for better opportunities. These were the people who had built GPT-2 and GPT-3. The people who had established OpenAI's research culture. The technical leaders who understood these systems better than almost anyone in the world. The AI industry watched in shock. What had happened inside OpenAI? What disagreement had been so fundamental that it caused this exodus? The answer was both simple and complex. Dario and his co-founders believed that AI safety needed to be treated as equal in importance to AI capabilities from day one. Not something you add later. Not something you iterate toward. Something you build in from the very beginning. They wanted to prove something. That you could develop incredibly powerful AI systems while making safety the top priority. That you didn't have to choose between being competitive and being responsible. That safety and capability could advance together, in tandem, neither sacrificed for the other. And they wanted to do it their way, free from the organizational pressures and strategic commitments that came with OpenAI's path. So they founded a new company. But first, they needed a name. Starting a company in December 2020 was surreal. The COVID pandemic was raging. Meeting in person was dangerous. The group of 15 to 20 people who would form the founding team met entirely over Zoom at first. In a conference room inside what would become Anthropic's offices, Jack Clark would later turn around his laptop to show one of their earliest documents. A spreadsheet of potential names. Aligned AI, Generative, Sponge, Swan, Sloth, Sparrow Systems. And there, in the list, Anthropic. Anthropic. A word that means relating to humans. Human-centered. Human-oriented. And critically, the domain name was available. "We like the name," the team wrote in the spreadsheet. "It is good." And so Anthropic was born. Eventually, as the pandemic's second wave subsided, the team began meeting for weekly lunches in San Francisco's Presser Park. They brought their own chairs, sat in a circle, talked about the future they were trying to build. It might sound odd that a group of less than 24 people meeting in a park would feel a sense of destiny, especially since they would need billions of dollars to see their mission through. But that was exactly the vibe in Anthropic's early days. The strangest thing about all of this, Jack Clark later said, is how inevitable so much of it felt to people on the inside. "We've done scaling laws. We could see the path to the models getting good." This group had seen the future at OpenAI. They knew what was coming. Models would keep getting more capable. The curve was clear. Within a few years, AI would be as capable as human experts in many domains. Within a decade, it might surpass human intelligence entirely. This wasn't speculation. This was extrapolation from clear empirical trends. The question was how to build that future responsibly. Anthropic's first task was raising money. Building state-of-the-art AI models required enormous computing resources. Billions of dollars for processors, data centers, electricity. You couldn't bootstrap this with credit cards and hope. You needed serious funding from day one. Former Google CEO Eric Schmidt was among Anthropic's first investors. He had met Dario through Dario's then-girlfriend and now wife, who Schmidt knew socially. The two had talked about technology when Dario was still at OpenAI, and about business when he started Anthropic. Schmidt's investment decision was interesting. He told people later that he invested in the person more than the concept. At this level, when you're doing an investment like that, you have essentially no data, right? Schmidt explained. You don't know what the revenue is. You don't know the market. You don't know what the product is. And so you fundamentally have to decide based on the people. And Dario was compelling. Dario is a brilliant scientist, Schmidt said, and he promised to hire brilliant scientists, which he did. In its first funding round, Anthropic raised $124 million. This was validation. Serious investors believed in the team and the mission. With that capital, Anthropic could begin building. But building what exactly? The technical answer was they were building large language models. Systems like GPT-3. The team knew how to do this. They had literally built GPT-2 and GPT-3 at OpenAI. They understood the architectures, the training methods, the data pipelines. They could build models that would compete with OpenAI's. But the deeper answer was more interesting. They were building a fundamentally different approach to AI safety. Something they would call constitutional AI. Most AI systems were trained using reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF. Humans would look at thousands of AI outputs and rate them. This one is good. That one is harmful. This one is helpful. That one is toxic. The AI would learn from these ratings, adjusting its behavior to produce more outputs that humans rated highly. But this approach had problems. It was opaque. The AI learned to maximize ratings, but you couldn't really explain why it chose one response over another. It was just doing what the average human rater preferred. And if the raters were biased, or the sample size was small, or the rating criteria were unclear, the AI would learn those biases and inconsistencies. Dario and his team wanted something different. Something more transparent. Something more principled. Constitutional AI worked differently. Instead of just learning from human ratings, the AI would be given an explicit constitution. A set of principles describing desired behavior. The AI would then critique its own outputs according to those principles. Does this response respect human autonomy? Is it truthful? Is it helpful? Does it avoid harm? The Constitution drew from profound sources. The 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Philosophical principles about beneficence and non-maleficence. Even, somewhat humorously, Apple's terms of service as a proxy for widely accepted norms of appropriate behavior online. The AI would generate a response. Then it would critique that response according to the constitutional principles. Then it would revise the response to better align with the principles. This self-evaluation and self-correction cycle happened many times during training, teaching the AI not just what to do, but why. Not just how to sound helpful, but how to actually be helpful in ways that respected human values. This was radically different from the prevailing approach. It was more transparent. You could read the Constitution and understand what values were being optimized for. It was more principled. The AI wasn't just mimicking human preferences. It was applying explicit ethical guidelines. And it reduced the need for humans to review potentially harmful content during training, since the AI could catch many problems itself. In the summer of 2022, Anthropic finished training the first version of their language model. They called it Claude, a name that evoked both sophistication and approachability. A Claude was someone you could talk to, someone trustworthy. The name fit. But they didn't release Claude. Not yet. Despite having a model that could compete with anything OpenAI had, despite the pressure to get to market, despite investors and potential customers asking when the product would launch, Anthropic held back. They wanted more internal safety testing. They wanted to be confident that Claude wouldn't cause harm. More importantly, they didn't want to trigger a race to deploy increasingly powerful AI systems before adequate safety measures existed. If Anthropic released Claude and it was better than GPT-3, OpenAI would respond with GPT-4. Then Anthropic would need to release Claude 2. Then GPT-5. Then Claude 3. A capabilities race with safety struggling to keep up. This patience, this willingness to wait, defined Anthropic's approach. While OpenAI released ChatGPT in November 2022 and watched it explode to 100 million users in 2 months, Anthropic continued testing Claude. Making sure it was ready. Making sure it was safe. When Claude finally launched in early 2023, more than a year after ChatGPT, the response was telling. Enterprises loved it. Companies that needed AI but were worried about risks found Claude's emphasis on safety compelling. Its constitutional AI framework meant they could trust it wouldn't generate harmful content. Its transparency meant they could understand and audit its behavior. By mid-2025, something remarkable had happened. Anthropic had captured 32% of the enterprise large language model market by usage, overtaking OpenAI's 25%. In coding tasks specifically, a critical enterprise use case, Anthropic held 42% market share, more than double OpenAI's 21%. Claude had become the preferred AI platform for businesses that prioritized safety, reliability, and governance. The company's annualized revenue reached $7 billion by the end of 2025, up from $1 billion at the start of the year. They were serving more than 300,000 business customers. This was vindication. Dario had bet that you could compete by prioritizing safety, by moving carefully, by building trust. And that bet was paying off. Anthropic was growing faster than almost any software company in history. But the journey wasn't simple or straightforward. Building a company in the shadow of OpenAI meant constant comparison. Constant questions. Why aren't you moving faster? Why did it take so long to release Claude? Aren't you just doing what OpenAI does but slower? Dario's answer was consistent. Speed matters, but not as much as getting it right. We believe you should only deploy AI systems when you've developed safety measures appropriate to their capabilities, he explained. This philosophy extended beyond just the models. It shaped every aspect of how Anthropic operated. The company incorporated itself as a Delaware public benefit corporation. Not a typical corporation focused solely on shareholder value, but one that balanced financial interests with public benefit. The mission was explicitly to develop and maintain advanced AI for the long-term benefit of humanity. Anthropic even created something unusual: a long-term benefit trust. This trust held special shares that could elect board members, ensuring that long-term safety considerations would always have a voice in company decisions, even as the company grew and took on more investors. The trust members weren't investors seeking returns. They were chosen for their commitment to responsible AI development. This governance structure sent a message. Anthropic was serious about its mission in a way that couldn't be easily compromised by future commercial pressures. By 2025, Anthropic had raised over $13 billion in funding. Amazon invested $8 billion. Google invested $2 billion. These weren't just financial investments. They were strategic partnerships. Amazon Web Services became Anthropic's primary cloud provider, giving Claude access to Amazon's massive infrastructure. Google Cloud integrated Claude into its platform, making it available to Google's enterprise customers worldwide. But with this money came questions. How independent was Anthropic really? With tech giants as major investors, could the company maintain its focus on safety over profit? Was this just another case of an idealistic startup eventually being absorbed into the commercial imperatives of big tech? Dario pushed back hard against this framing. The investments, he insisted, came with no strings attached regarding AI development philosophy. Amazon and Google got access to cutting-edge AI technology for their platforms. Anthropic got the resources needed to compete at the frontier of AI research. Both sides benefited. But Anthropic retained full control over its research direction and product decisions. This independence would be tested in July 2025 when a memo Dario wrote to Anthropic staff leaked to the press. In it, he acknowledged that the company was seeking investments from the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. He knew this would be controversial. These were authoritarian regimes with poor human rights records. In the memo, Dario addressed the issue directly. Unfortunately, I think no bad person should ever benefit from our success is a pretty difficult principle to run a business on. It was a remarkably honest admission. In an ideal world, AI technology would only flow to democracies with strong human rights protections. But in reality, capital was global. Technology was global. If Anthropic didn't take investment from these countries, other AI companies would. And if Anthropic wanted to be competitive, wanted to influence the direction of AI development globally, it needed to be in the game. This memo revealed something important about Dario's thinking. He wasn't a naive idealist. He understood that building transformative technology in the real world meant making compromises. The question was which compromises were acceptable and which crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. For Dario, the line was clear. He would take money from imperfect actors if it meant Anthropic could continue developing safe AI and influencing the industry toward better practices. What he wouldn't do was compromise on the core technical approach to safety. Constitutional AI wasn't negotiable. The deliberate pace of deployment wasn't negotiable. The public benefit corporation structure wasn't negotiable. You could question whether this was the right set of trade-offs. But you couldn't question that Dario had thought deeply about these dilemmas and made conscious choices about what mattered most. As Anthropic grew, Dario had to evolve from researcher to CEO. These required different skills. As a researcher, you could focus on the technical problem in front of you. As CEO, you had to manage a company with hundreds of employees, billions in revenue, partnerships with some of the world's largest corporations, and responsibilities to users around the globe. By all accounts, Dario brought his systematic thinking to leadership. Just as he approached AI research with rigor and discipline, he approached company building the same way. He hired people he trusted. He built a culture where debate was encouraged and disagreement was seen as productive. He made sure that diverse perspectives, from physics to philosophy to neuroscience, were represented on the team. Amanda Askell, a researcher at Anthropic working on alignment and Claude's character, later noted that the company had deliberately sought people from varied backgrounds. This wasn't just about technical diversity. It was about ensuring different worldviews were present when making decisions about AI behavior. What does it mean for AI to be helpful? What counts as harm? How should AI respond to questions where there isn't a clear right answer? These questions required philosophical sophistication, not just technical expertise. Under Dario's leadership, Anthropic developed what they called AI safety levels, a framework for categorizing the capabilities and risks of AI systems as they became more powerful. Similar to biosafety levels for handling dangerous pathogens, AI safety levels provided a common language for discussing what precautions were appropriate for systems of different capability levels. Level 1 systems could be deployed widely with minimal oversight. Level 2 systems required more careful monitoring. Level 3 systems, approaching or exceeding human expert capability in important domains, required extensive safety testing before deployment. Level 4 systems, if they ever existed, would be superintelligent systems requiring precautions we could barely imagine. This framework did something important. It made abstract concerns about AI safety concrete and actionable. Instead of arguing about whether AI was dangerous in general, you could ask which safety level a specific system belonged in and what precautions that level required. Anthropic also published what they called responsible scaling policies. As models got more capable, what concrete steps would the company take to ensure safety? The policies spelled it out. More extensive testing before deployment. Red teaming, where researchers actively tried to make the system behave badly to find vulnerabilities. Monitoring of deployed systems for unexpected behaviors. Clear criteria for when to pause scaling if safety measures weren't keeping pace. These might sound like common sense. But in an industry moving at breakneck speed, where the commercial pressure to deploy faster and capture market share was intense, having written policies with clear triggers and criteria was unusual. It represented a commitment to slow down if necessary, even if competitors were racing ahead. Of course, critics questioned whether Anthropic actually followed these policies or whether they were just good public relations. Yann LeCun, Meta's chief AI scientist, suggested that Anthropic's warnings about AI risks were safety theater designed to manipulate legislators into restricting open-source models, giving an advantage to well-funded companies like Anthropic. Dario pushed back. It will depend on the future, and we're not always going to be right, but we're calling it as best we can. The company was obligated to be honest about both AI's potential and its risks. If they saw something concerning, they had a responsibility to say so, even if it made them look like they were fear-mongering. This tension, between those who saw Dario as a responsible leader honestly grappling with hard problems and those who saw him as a doomer using safety concerns to advance commercial interests, would define much of the public discourse around Anthropic. Dario himself seemed unbothered by the criticism. In interviews, he would calmly explain his thinking, acknowledge uncertainty where it existed, and defend the choices Anthropic had made. He didn't claim to have all the answers. But he was confident they were asking the right questions. One of the most revealing aspects of Dario's leadership was his willingness to publicly discuss his timelines for AI development. Many AI researchers were reluctant to make predictions, wary of looking foolish if they were wrong. Dario was remarkably specific. In October 2024, he published an essay titled Machines of Loving Grace: How AI Could Transform the World for the Better. The title was taken from a Richard Brautigan poem, All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace, which imagined a harmonious future where humans and computers lived together in mutual care. Dario's essay was simultaneously optimistic and cautious. He laid out a vision for how powerful AI could solve humanity's greatest challenges: disease, poverty, political dysfunction, environmental degradation. If we get AI right, he argued, we could enter an unprecedented era of human flourishing. But the essay also acknowledged the risks. Misuse of AI by authoritarian regimes, autonomous weapons systems, economic disruption from mass unemployment. Most seriously, the risk that highly capable AI systems might not remain aligned with human values as they became more intelligent. This dual message, hope and caution intertwined, characterized Dario's public communication. He refused to be put in a box. He wasn't a techno-utopian who thought AI would automatically solve all problems. But he also wasn't a doomer who thought AI would inevitably destroy humanity. He believed the outcome depended on choices we make now. How we develop these systems. What values we encode. What safeguards we build. In his essay, Dario predicted that powerful AI, what he called transformative AI, could arrive between 2026 and 2028, with 2027 as his median expectation. This was a shockingly near-term timeline. Just 2 to 3 years away from the essay's publication. He defined transformative AI as systems that could augment human capabilities to the point where they could replace a large majority of current human jobs, enable new scientific discoveries at a pace far exceeding the current rate, or significantly accelerate economic growth. In other words, AI that fundamentally changed what was possible for human civilization. Critics suggested this was hype, marketing to drive investment and attention. But Dario backed up his timeline with specific reasoning. The scaling laws suggested models would continue improving predictably as they got larger. Each generation of models was coming faster than the last. GPT-3 in 2020. GPT-4 in 2023. Claude 3 in 2024. The pace was accelerating. Extrapolate that trend forward, and transformative AI in 2 to 3 years wasn't implausible. It was the logical continuation of what was already happening. What made Dario's prediction particularly interesting was that he wasn't just talking about when transformative AI would be possible in a lab. He was talking about when it would be deployed and affecting the world. This suggested he believed Anthropic and its competitors would actually build and release such systems in that timeframe. The implications were staggering. If Dario was right, we were living in the final years before AI fundamentally transformed human civilization. Everything we knew about work, about economy, about what it meant to be human in a world where machines could think, was about to change. Dario's sister Daniela played a crucial but often overlooked role in Anthropic's story. As co-founder and president, she handled much of the business side while Dario focused on research and product. More importantly, she led Anthropic's policy work, engaging with governments around the world to shape AI regulation. The sibling dynamic was unusual but effective. Dario and Daniela had known each other their entire lives. They trusted each other completely. They could disagree strongly in meetings without damaging their relationship. And they brought complementary perspectives. Dario thought in terms of technical capabilities and safety measures. Daniela thought in terms of societal impact and governance structures. In interviews, both emphasized how their childhood, particularly their father's death, had shaped their shared sense of urgency. They weren't building AI for intellectual challenge or commercial success, though those were part of it. They were building AI because they believed it could prevent the kind of tragedy their family had experienced. The slow progress of medical research. The people who died waiting for cures that came just a few years too late. If AI could accelerate scientific discovery, if it could help researchers find treatments faster, if it could analyze billions of molecular combinations to identify new drugs, then every year that advanced AI arrived earlier meant lives saved. This was personal for them. It wasn't abstract. This urgency, however, had to be balanced with caution. Moving too fast without adequate safety measures could lead to disasters that set the entire field back. Dario and Daniela were acutely aware of this tension. How do you move quickly enough to save lives through beneficial applications, while moving slowly enough to avoid catastrophic mistakes? Their answer was to separate the two timelines. Move as fast as possible on safety research and technical alignment measures. Don't wait for problems to emerge before addressing them. But be more deliberate about deployment. Test thoroughly. Understand risks. Have monitoring in place before releasing powerful systems to the world. This philosophy shaped Anthropic's product strategy. While OpenAI released ChatGPT broadly to consumers and watched it explode to viral popularity, Anthropic focused first on enterprise customers. Companies that needed AI but could implement governance structures around its use. Customers who valued reliability over novelty. By 2025, this strategy had clearly worked. Anthropic's enterprise focus gave it a stable, high-value customer base. Companies were willing to pay significant sums for AI they could trust. The business model was proving sustainable. But Dario wasn't satisfied with just business success. He wanted Anthropic to shape the entire AI industry towards safer practices. This meant being vocal about concerns, even when it made competitors uncomfortable. In September 2025, Dario testified before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee. The hearing was titled Oversight of AI, Legislating on Artificial Intelligence. Sitting alongside other AI leaders, Dario had a platform to explain his views to lawmakers who would shape AI regulation. His message was nuanced. Yes, AI posed serious risks that required government oversight. But no, heavy-handed regulation that stifled innovation wasn't the answer. The goal should be targeted regulation focused on the highest-risk applications. Autonomous weapons. AI systems that could cause mass harm. Systems that made consequential decisions about people's lives without human oversight. For most AI applications, Dario argued, existing laws around product safety, consumer protection, and liability were sufficient. You didn't need new AI-specific regulation for every use case. But you did need requirements for safety testing and transparency for the most powerful systems. This position was carefully calibrated. Dario needed to satisfy lawmakers that the industry was taking risks seriously, while not advocating for regulations that would cripple AI development or advantage large companies like Anthropic over smaller competitors. In the hearing room, Dario came across as thoughtful and measured. Not hyping Are's near-term capabilities. Not dismissing concerns as overblown. Simply trying to give honest assessments based on what he saw in the research. Senators asked him about job displacement. Would AI eliminate millions of jobs? Dario acknowledged this was possible but noted it had always been hard to predict how technology affected employment long-term. Historically, he said, technology has generally created more jobs than it destroyed, though it often created different jobs that required different skills. What about autonomous weapons? Should there be an international ban? Dario supported restrictions but was skeptical about complete bans. Countries that believe their adversaries are developing autonomous weapons will feel pressure to develop them as well, he explained. The challenge is creating verification mechanisms that nations can trust. What about AI safety research itself? Should the government fund it? Absolutely, Dario argued. Private companies had incentives to invest in safety, but they also faced commercial pressures. Government funding for independent safety research would provide an important check on industry claims and help develop best practices that all companies could adopt. Throughout the testimony, Dario emphasized a central theme. The choices we make in the next few years about how to develop and deploy AI will shape the trajectory of human civilization. We don't have the luxury of waiting to see what happens and then reacting. By the time problems are obvious, it may be too late to fix them. We need to be proactive, thoughtful, and willing to slow down if safety measures aren't keeping pace with capabilities. This wasn't what some senators wanted to hear. Several pressed him for more specific predictions. Exactly when would AI reach human-level intelligence? Exactly what dangers were most immediate? Exactly what regulations should Congress pass? Dario resisted oversimplifying. I don't think anyone can give you exact dates with high confidence, he said. What I can tell you is that AI capabilities are improving faster than most people expected, and that trend will likely continue. Whether that means human-level AI in 3 years or 10 years, I can't say with certainty. But I'm confident it's not 50 years away. After the hearing, reactions were mixed. Some praised Dario's thoughtful approach. Others felt he had been too cautious, not pushing hard enough for aggressive regulation. Still others thought he had exaggerated risks to advance Anthropic's interests. This was becoming a familiar pattern. Dario occupied a middle ground that left him open to criticism from all sides. Those who thought AI risks were overblown saw him as a fearmonger. Those who thought AI needed strict regulation saw him as too industry-friendly. Those who wanted AI development to proceed without constraint saw him as an obstacle. But Dario seemed comfortable in this position. He wasn't trying to make everyone happy. He was trying to chart what he believed was the right course, even if it was politically awkward. Throughout 2025, as Claude's market share grew and Anthropic's influence expanded, Dario continued to emphasize constitutional AI as the company's distinctive approach. In interviews and presentations, he would explain how it differed from competitors' methods. Most AI companies, he would note, trained their models primarily through reinforcement learning from human feedback. Humans rated outputs, and the AI learned to maximize those ratings. This worked but had limitations. The AI learned to mimic what raters preferred without necessarily understanding the underlying principles. And if the raters had biases or inconsistent preferences, the AI would learn those biases. Constitutional AI, in contrast, gave the AI an explicit ethical framework. Here are the principles. Now critique your own responses against those principles. Revise to align better. Repeat this process thousands of times during training until the principles are deeply embedded. The advantage, Dario argued, was transparency and robustness. You could read the Constitution and understand what values the AI was optimizing for. You could modify the Constitution if you wanted different behavior. And the AI would generalize better to novel situations because it had learned principles, not just patterns in human preferences. Critics pointed out that this just moved the problem. Now instead of biases in human raters, you had biases in whoever wrote the Constitution. How do you decide what principles to include? Who gets to choose? Isn't this just imposing one group's values on everyone who uses the AI? Dario acknowledged these concerns. The Constitution was carefully designed to reflect widely shared values. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Principles of beneficence and non-maleficence from medical ethics. Democratic values like respect for autonomy and human dignity. These weren't arbitrary choices. They were principles that billions of people across cultures endorsed. But he also acknowledged that some value questions didn't have universal answers. Different cultures had different views on privacy, on free speech, on the role of authority. Anthropic's solution was to make Claude's Constitution transparent and to allow enterprise customers to specify additional principles relevant to their context. A company using Claude in healthcare might add principles specific to medical ethics. A company in education might emphasize principles around child safety and age-appropriate content. The constitutional framework was flexible enough to accommodate these variations while maintaining core commitments to honesty and harmlessness. This approach resonated with enterprise customers, who appreciated being able to customize AI behavior to their needs while knowing the underlying safety measures remained robust. By the end of 2025, Anthropic had established itself as a genuine alternative to OpenAI. Not just in terms of capabilities, Claude 4.5 was widely considered comparable to GPT-4 in most tasks, but in terms of approach and philosophy. If OpenAI represented move fast and break things applied to AI, Anthropic represented move thoughtfully and build it right. If OpenAI was optimizing for rapid deployment and viral adoption, Anthropic was optimizing for enterprise trust and long-term safety. Both strategies had merit. OpenAI's rapid iteration meant they got user feedback quickly and could improve based on how millions of people actually used their product. Anthropic's careful approach meant fewer embarrassing failures and stronger relationships with customers who needed reliability. The question was which strategy would prove better in the long run. As AI systems became more powerful and more deeply integrated into critical infrastructure, would being first matter less than being trustworthy? Or would OpenAI's head start prove insurmountable, allowing them to iterate towards safety while maintaining dominance? Dario bet on the latter. He believed that as AI capabilities approached and exceeded human-level intelligence, organizations and regulators would demand strong safety guarantees. Moving fast and hoping for the best wouldn't be acceptable anymore. The companies that had invested deeply in safety from the beginning would have an advantage. Time would tell if he was right. One of the most striking aspects of Dario's public presence was his willingness to engage seriously with concerns about existential risk from AI. Many AI researchers dismissed such concerns as science fiction. They argued that current AI systems were narrow tools, nowhere near the kind of general intelligence that could pose existential threats. Worrying about AGI going rogue was like worrying about overpopulation on Mars. A problem so far in the future and so speculative that it distracted from real near-term issues. Dario disagreed. He thought existential risk from advanced AI was a real possibility that deserved serious attention. Not because it was certain or even likely, but because the stakes were so high. If there was even a 10% chance of advanced AI causing catastrophic harm, that was worth dedicating substantial resources to preventing. His reasoning went like this. AI capabilities were improving rapidly and predictably. If the scaling laws held, we would likely see human-level AI within a decade, possibly sooner. Once AI reached human-level intelligence, there was no reason to think it would stop there. It could continue improving, potentially reaching superhuman intelligence. A superintelligent AI would be extraordinarily capable. It could solve problems that humans couldn't solve. It could discover new technologies. It could potentially improve its own intelligence, leading to recursive self-improvement and an intelligence explosion. This sounded like science fiction, but it followed logically from premises that most AI researchers accepted. If intelligence was the result of computation, and we were getting better at building computational systems, then we would eventually build systems more intelligent than humans. And more intelligent meant more capable of achieving goals. The critical question was whether such systems would remain aligned with human values and goals. A superintelligent AI that wanted to help humanity could be tremendously beneficial. A superintelligent AI with goals misaligned with human well-being could be catastrophic. This was the alignment problem. How do you ensure that as AI systems become more intelligent, they continue wanting what we want? It wasn't enough to program in goals at the beginning. A sufficiently intelligent system might modify its own goals or find loopholes in how goals were specified. It needed to understand and care about human values in a robust way that persisted even as it became more capable. Dario believed this problem was solvable but not trivial. It required dedicated research now, before we reached the critical point. Waiting until we had superintelligent AI to figure out alignment would be too late. This perspective put him at odds with many in the AI community who thought existential risk talk was overblown. But it also put him at odds with some in the AI safety community who thought any AI development was reckless. Dario believed you could work on building powerful AI and work on safety simultaneously. In fact, you had to. You needed to understand how advanced AI systems actually behaved in order to develop effective safety measures. This middle position, developing capable AI while treating safety as a top priority, defined Anthropic's mission. And it required navigating constant tensions. When you're building potentially world-transforming technology, the question of who benefits and who decides becomes paramount. Dario was acutely aware of this. He spoke often about the need for AI benefits to be widely distributed, not concentrated in the hands of a few companies or countries. But how do you actually achieve that? Anthropic was a private company funded by billions of dollars from tech giants. Its technology was proprietary. Claude wasn't open source. You couldn't download the model and run it yourself. You accessed it through Anthropic's API or apps, under Anthropic's terms and conditions. Critics argued this was fundamentally at odds with democratizing AI. If you really wanted AI benefits widely shared, you should release your models publicly, as Meta had done with Llama. Let anyone use them, modify them, build on them. Dario's response was that open sourcing advanced AI created its own risks. A powerful AI model released openly could be fine-tuned by bad actors to remove safety guardrails. It could be used to generate harmful content at scale. It could enable malicious applications that would be harder if AI access was mediated through responsible companies. He acknowledged this created a tension. Concentrating AI capabilities in a few companies created power imbalances and limited access. But releasing everything openly created safety risks. The right balance, he believed, was something in between. Make AI widely accessible through APIs and partnerships, but maintain some control to prevent misuse. This was another position that satisfied nobody fully. Open-source advocates thought it was self-serving, using safety as an excuse to maintain Anthropic's competitive advantage. Those concerned about centralized tech power thought it was inadequate, leaving too much control in private hands. But Dario maintained it was the right approach given current capabilities. As AI became more powerful, the calculation might shift. But for now, responsible deployment meant mediated access, not complete openness. Dario's intellectual evolution from physicist to neuroscientist to AI researcher gave him a distinctive perspective. Many AI researchers came from computer science backgrounds. They thought of AI primarily as an engineering problem. Build better architectures. Collect more data. Scale up compute. Optimize algorithms. Dario brought a different lens. His background in neuroscience meant he thought about AI in terms of intelligence itself. Not just as software, but as something that learns, adapts, and potentially understands. This shaped his approach to safety. Many technical AI safety researchers focused on formal methods. Mathematical proofs that a system would behave correctly. Verification tools that could check AI decisions against specifications. These were valuable, but Dario was skeptical they were sufficient. Intelligence was messy. Human values were complex and contextual. You couldn't capture everything important in a formal specification. Instead, Dario's approach emphasized learning systems that could generalize from principles rather than following rigid rules. Constitutional AI embodied this. Rather than trying to anticipate every possible situation and program the correct response, give the AI principles and the ability to reason about how those principles apply in novel contexts. This was closer to how humans learn ethics. We don't memorize rules for every situation. We learn principles and judgment. We develop intuitions through experience about what's right and wrong. Dario believed AI safety would ultimately require something similar. Systems that learn values in a deep, generalizable way, not just followed programmed constraints. This put him somewhat at odds with the more formal approach to AI safety popular in academic computer science. But it resonated with researchers from cognitive science and neuroscience backgrounds who understood that intelligence involved more than following algorithms. By mid-2025, Anthropic had grown to over 3,000 employees. This created new challenges. How do you maintain a culture focused on safety and thoughtfulness when you're growing that fast? How do you onboard hundreds of new employees every quarter and ensure they understand and embrace the company's mission? Dario was deeply involved in hiring, particularly for senior research positions. He personally interviewed many candidates. He looked for technical excellence, obviously, but also for alignment with Anthropic's values. Did they take safety seriously? Were they capable of considering multiple perspectives? Could they handle uncertainty and ambiguity? The company developed extensive onboarding programs. New employees spent significant time learning about constitutional AI, about Anthropic's safety frameworks, about the philosophical foundations of the work. This wasn't just about technical training. It was about cultural indoctrination in the best sense. Making sure everyone understood what the company was trying to do and why it mattered. Former employees later reported that Anthropic had one of the most thoughtful and mission-driven cultures in tech. Yes, people worked hard. Yes, the stakes felt high. But there was also space for disagreement and debate. Dario encouraged people to raise concerns, to question assumptions, to push back on prevailing views. He believed the best ideas emerged from intellectual friction, not from everyone nodding along. This culture had downsides. Decisions sometimes took longer than at competitors because more voices were heard and considered. There was a tendency toward analysis paralysis, endlessly debating risks and benefits. Some employees found it frustrating when they wanted to move faster. But it also created loyalty. People who worked at Anthropic believed they were doing something important. They weren't just building another tech product. They were shaping how humanity would relate to artificial intelligence for generations. That sense of purpose, that feeling of being part of something historic, was powerful. As 2025 drew to a close, speculation intensified about Claude AI, the next major version of Anthropic's AI assistant. Rumors suggested it would represent a significant capability jump. Better reasoning, better code generation, better understanding of complex context. Some whispered it might approach or exceed GPT-5, OpenAI's rumored next release. Dario remained tight-lipped about timelines and capabilities. He had learned to be cautious about overpromising. But in internal communications that occasionally leaked, it was clear Anthropic was pushing hard on several fronts. One area of focus was what they called mechanistic interpretability, understanding what was actually happening inside neural networks. Current AI systems were black boxes. You put in an input, got an output, but couldn't explain what happened in between. This was problematic for safety. How could you ensure an AI wouldn't behave badly if you didn't understand how it made decisions? Anthropic had assembled a team of researchers working to crack this problem. They were developing techniques to trace information flow through neural networks, to identify which neurons activated for what concepts, to understand the algorithms that emerged from training. This work was painstaking and often inconclusive. Neural networks with billions of parameters were almost incomprehensibly complex. But progress was happening. The team had published several papers showing they could identify interpretable features in small networks and sometimes in larger ones. They could see, for instance, which parts of a network activated when processing questions about physics versus questions about history. They could identify neurons associated with sentiment or with certain topics. This interpretability research wasn't just academic. It had practical applications for safety. If you could understand what concepts an AI had learned and how it used them, you could potentially detect misalignment before it caused problems. You could see if the AI had learned unintended associations or if its internal reasoning matched the reasoning you wanted. Dario saw this as one of Anthropic's key competitive advantages. While other companies focused primarily on making models bigger and more capable, Anthropic was investing heavily in understanding how models work. This understanding would pay dividends as systems became more powerful and the cost of mistakes increased. Another area of research focus was what Anthropic called scalable oversight. As AI systems became more capable, how could humans effectively supervise them? You couldn't have humans check every output from an AI that could generate millions of responses per day. And when the AI was smarter than any individual human in certain domains, how could humans even evaluate if its outputs were correct? The solution, Anthropic believed, was to use AI to help humans supervise AI. You could have multiple AI systems cross-check each other. You could train AI systems to explain their reasoning in ways humans could audit. You could develop automated tests that verified properties of AI outputs without requiring humans to evaluate everything. This might sound circular. Using AI to oversee AI? But the idea was to create systems of checks and balances. Multiple AIs with different training or architectures would be unlikely to make the same mistakes. If they disagreed, that flagged outputs for human review. And by making AI systems explain their reasoning, you made it easier for humans to spot flawed logic, even if they couldn't directly evaluate the answer. This research was still in early stages, but Dario believed it would be crucial for safely deploying highly capable AI. You needed oversight mechanisms that scaled with AI capabilities. Human supervision alone wouldn't be sufficient. Looking back at Dario Amodei's journey from his birth in 1983 to his leadership of Anthropic in 2025, several through lines emerge. First, the importance of fundamentals. Whether studying physics, neuroscience, or AI, Dario always sought deep understanding of basic principles. He wasn't content with surface-level knowledge or engineering heuristics. He wanted to know how things actually worked, what laws governed behavior, what fundamental patterns existed. This orientation toward fundamentals shaped his approach to AI safety. He didn't just want to patch problems as they arose. He wanted to understand the underlying dynamics of how AI systems learned and behaved so that safety measures could be robust and generalizable. Second, the integration of multiple disciplines. Dario's path through physics, biology, neuroscience, and computer science wasn't random. Each field gave him tools and perspectives that proved valuable later. Physics taught him to think in terms of laws and predictions. Neuroscience taught him how intelligence emerges from complex systems. Biology taught him about robustness and adaptation. Computer science taught him about information and computation. This interdisciplinary foundation let him see connections others missed. AI safety wasn't just a computer science problem. It was a problem that required understanding intelligence, values, human cognition, social dynamics, and more. The ability to draw on multiple fields gave Dario advantages in thinking about these challenges. Third, the balance of urgency and patience. From his father's death to his work on AI, Dario had internalized that time matters, that moving faster can save lives and reduce suffering. But he had also learned that moving too fast without understanding risks can cause disasters. This created a productive tension in his thinking. Push hard on capabilities, but not at the expense of safety. Move deliberately, but not so slowly that opportunities to do good are lost. Fourth, the willingness to start over. Leaving OpenAI at the peak of his career there took courage. He was walking away from one of the most prestigious positions in AI to start a new company with uncertain prospects. But he believed his vision for how AI should be developed differed enough from OpenAI's direction that building separately was worth the cost. This willingness to prioritize mission over comfort or status would define much of Dario's career. He made choices based on what he believed was right for the long-term trajectory of AI, even when those choices were difficult or unpopular. Fifth, the commitment to transparency and honesty. Whether in his memo about Middle Eastern investments, his testimony to Congress, or his essays about AI timelines, Dario consistently tried to communicate clearly about his thinking, including uncertainties and trade-offs. He didn't claim to have all the answers. He acknowledged when he was making predictions that might be wrong. He admitted when there were conflicts between different values or goals. This honesty built trust, even with people who disagreed with his conclusions. They might think he was wrong, but they generally believed he was sincere in his concerns and trying to navigate difficult problems in good faith. As 2026 began, Dario faced perhaps the most consequential period of his career. If his predictions were correct, the next 2 years would see the emergence of AI systems with capabilities approaching or matching human experts across many domains. This wouldn't just be a technical milestone. It would be a civilizational inflection point. How these systems were developed, who controlled them, what values they embodied, how their benefits and risks were distributed, these decisions would shape human history. Dario found himself in a position of enormous influence over those decisions, not because he sought power, but because he had spent 15 years preparing for exactly this moment. The choices he and other AI leaders made in the coming years would determine whether his father's generation was the last to die waiting for cures that came too late, or whether AI would fulfill its promise of reducing suffering and expanding human potential. They would determine whether AI remained a tool that empowered people or became something more autonomous and potentially uncontrollable. They would determine whether the benefits of AI flowed broadly or concentrated dangerously. Dario knew he wouldn't get every decision right. The future was uncertain. There were no perfect choices, only trade-offs between different risks and values. But he believed the effort to steer toward better outcomes was worthwhile, even if success wasn't guaranteed. In his Machines of Loving Grace essay, Dario had written about his hope for a future where AI helped create what he called a fundamental transformation of human biology and society. Not just incremental improvements, but changes as profound as the agricultural or industrial revolutions. The elimination of most diseases. The extension of healthy human lifespan. The acceleration of scientific discovery to solve problems like climate change and poverty. The enhancement of human creativity and capability. But he also acknowledged the darker possibilities. Concentration of power in unaccountable hands. Loss of human agency as decisions were delegated to AI. Catastrophic accidents from deploying systems we didn't fully understand. Malicious use of AI for surveillance, manipulation, or violence. The erosion of what made human life meaningful as machines became capable of doing everything humans could do. The difference between these futures came down to choices. Technical choices about how to build AI systems. Policy choices about how to regulate and govern them. Social choices about how to distribute their benefits. Philosophical choices about what values to encode and what kind of future we want. Dario saw his role as helping ensure those choices were made thoughtfully, with full consideration of risks and long-term consequences. He didn't claim to know the right answers, but he was committed to asking the right questions and building organizations and systems that took those questions seriously. In interviews, when asked what kept him up at night, Dario would often mention a specific scenario. Not robots taking over, not a sci-fi nightmare of malevolent AI. His worry was simpler and more subtle. That we would deploy increasingly powerful AI systems without really understanding how they work or what they might do in novel situations. That we would give them more and more control over important decisions. And that one day, one of these systems would do something no one predicted, with consequences no one intended, and by the time we realized what was happening, it would be too late to undo. This wasn't paranoia. It was an engineer's caution about complex systems. Every sufficiently complex system eventually exhibits unexpected behavior. The question is whether we're prepared to handle that when it happens with AI. Anthropic's research, its safety frameworks, its constitutional AI approach, all of this was about preparation. Building the tools and understanding needed to handle unexpected situations. Creating mechanisms to detect problems early. Establishing governance structures that could pause or shut down systems if needed. None of it was perfect. But Dario believed it represented honest attempts to grapple with genuinely hard problems. As he looked ahead to 2026 and beyond, Dario felt both excitement and trepidation. The technology he had worked toward his entire career was finally arriving. The systems that could revolutionize medicine, science, and human capability were becoming real. But so were the risks. The same capabilities that could cure disease could be used to create bioweapons. The same intelligence that could solve climate change could potentially be used to manipulate billions of people. The future was arriving faster than anyone had expected. And Dario Amodei, the physicist turned neuroscientist turned AI researcher, the co-founder and CEO of Anthropic, found himself at the center of determining what that future would look like. He thought back sometimes to his father, Ricardo, the leather craftsman who had taught him about patience and precision. His father had worked with his hands, creating beautiful things from raw materials, putting care into every stitch and detail. There was something profound in that. The belief that how you did things mattered as much as what you did. That quality and craftsmanship were worth pursuing even when shortcuts were available. Dario carried that lesson into his work on AI. In a field obsessed with speed and being first, he insisted on craftsmanship. On doing things carefully. On building systems that were not just powerful but trustworthy. His father would probably have been proud of that, even if he couldn't have imagined the context in which his son would apply the lesson. The story of Dario Amodei is still being written. Whether Anthropic succeeds in its mission. Whether constitutional AI proves to be a meaningful advance in safety. Whether the approach of moving carefully while others race ahead was wise or naive. We won't know the answers for years, perhaps decades. But what we can say is that Dario Amodei represents something important in the history of artificial intelligence. The idea that progress and safety are not opposing goals but must be pursued together. The belief that those building transformative technology have responsibilities that extend beyond their shareholders to all of humanity. The conviction that how we build AI matters as much as whether we build it. In an industry often characterized by hubris and recklessness, by grandiose claims and moving fast and breaking things, Dario Amodei stands out for his caution, his thoughtfulness, his willingness to admit uncertainty. Whether this approach will prove successful remains to be seen. But it represents an important alternative vision for how humanity might navigate the profound challenges and opportunities of the AI age. As artificial intelligence grows more powerful and more pervasive, as it becomes more deeply woven into the fabric of society and the economy, the questions Dario has spent his career grappling with will only become more urgent. How do we ensure these systems remain aligned with human values? How do we distribute their benefits broadly? How do we prevent misuse while enabling beneficial applications? How do we maintain human agency and dignity in a world where machines can do nearly everything we can? These are not just technical questions. They're philosophical and political and deeply human questions. Questions about what kind of future we want and what we're willing to do to achieve it. Questions that will define the next chapter of human history. Dario Amodei doesn't have all the answers. He would be the first to admit that. But he's asking the question seriously, building institutions to address them responsibly, and trying to chart a path forward that honors both the immense promise and the genuine risks of artificial intelligence. That might not guarantee success. But it's a worthy effort. And in the end, perhaps that's what matters most. Not that we get everything right, but that we try with integrity, thoughtfulness, and care to navigate one of the most consequential moments in human history. The machines of loving grace that Richard Brautigan imagined, that Dario invoked in his essay, remain a hope rather than a certainty. Whether AI will watch over us with care or whether it will bring new forms of danger and control remains to be determined. But if thoughtful, cautious, mission-driven people like Dario Amodei continue to shape its development, there is at least a chance that the future will be one we can embrace rather than fear. And perhaps that is the most fitting note on which to end this story. Not with certainty, but with possibility. Not with guarantees, but with commitment. The story of Dario Amodei is the story of someone who saw both the promise and the peril of artificial intelligence earlier than most, and who dedicated his life to trying to maximize the first while minimizing the second. Whether he succeeds will depend on countless factors beyond his control. But the effort itself, the seriousness with which he has approached these challenges, the organizations and ideas he has built, the conversations he has catalyzed, these contributions are already meaningful, regardless of what the future holds. In the years ahead, as AI continues its rapid advancement, as the systems Dario and his colleagues are building become more powerful and more integrated into every aspect of human life, the world will look back on this period as pivotal. The early 2000s and 2020s, when a small number of researchers and entrepreneurs made choices that set the trajectory for how humanity would coexist with artificial intelligence. Dario Amodei will be remembered as one of the key figures in that story, someone who tried to steer toward a future where intelligence, whether human or artificial, was used to reduce suffering and expand possibility. The full impact of his work won't be clear for decades. Perhaps his predictions about transformative AI arriving in 2027 will prove accurate, and we'll see within just a few years whether his approach to safety was sufficient. Perhaps the timeline will be longer, giving more time for safety research to mature before capabilities reach critical levels. Perhaps the challenges will prove different than anticipated, requiring new solutions no one has yet imagined. But whatever unfolds, Dario's insistence that we take safety seriously from the beginning, that we build values into AI systems rather than hoping for the best, that we move thoughtfully even when under pressure to move fast, these principles will have mattered. They represent a different path than the one Silicon Valley typically follows, a path defined not by disruption for its own sake but by responsibility and long-term thinking. In that sense, Dario Amodei's greatest contribution might not be any specific technical innovation or any particular AI system. It might simply be the example he set. The demonstration that you could be ambitious about technology's potential while being humble about your ability to predict and control its consequences. That you could pursue transformative breakthroughs while insisting on safeguards and oversight. That you could build a successful company while prioritizing mission over short-term profit. These lessons will matter long after the specific details of Claude or constitutional AI or any particular research paper have been superseded by newer developments. Because the challenge of developing powerful technology responsibly isn't going away. It's the central challenge of our time and likely of the times to come. How do we create tools that enhance human flourishing without introducing unacceptable risks? How do we innovate boldly while learning from past mistakes? How do we balance the urgent need for progress with the equally urgent need for caution? Dario Amodei dedicated his career to grappling with these questions in the context of artificial intelligence. His answers aren't perfect. No one's are. But the seriousness with which he approached the questions, the rigor he brought to thinking about both capabilities and safety, the institutions he built to embody those values, these represent important contributions to how humanity will navigate its relationship with the technologies it creates. Looking at Dario's journey from beginning to present, several lessons emerge that extend beyond artificial intelligence to any transformative technology or ambitious endeavor. The first lesson is about the value of deep knowledge across multiple domains. Dario's background in physics gave him mathematical rigor and the ability to think in terms of fundamental laws and patterns. His work in neuroscience taught him how intelligence emerges from complex systems and how learning happens at a biological level. His experience in computational biology showed him how to handle massive datasets and extract meaningful signals from noise. Each of these prepared him for different aspects of AI research and safety. Too often, people specialize narrowly, becoming experts in one small area while remaining ignorant of adjacent fields. Dario's breadth, his willingness to move between disciplines and absorb insights from each, gave him perspectives that pure computer scientists might miss. When thinking about AI safety, he could draw on biological principles about robustness and adaptation. When thinking about AI capabilities, he could apply neuroscience insights about how learning happens in neural circuits. This interdisciplinary approach was a source of genuine insight and competitive advantage. The second lesson is about the importance of formative experiences in shaping worldview and priorities. Dario's father's death from a disease that became treatable shortly afterward left a permanent mark. It created urgency. It made him acutely aware that timing matters, that people suffer and die while we're figuring things out. But it also created caution, because rushing development of medical treatments, or any technology, without adequate testing can also cause harm. This tension between urgency and caution, between moving fast to help people and moving carefully to avoid mistakes, defined Dario's approach to AI. He wanted powerful AI systems developed quickly because of the good they could do. But he insisted on safety measures and thoughtful deployment because of the harm they could cause. This wasn't contradiction. It was the product of deeply understanding that both speed and caution matter, and that the hard work is balancing them appropriately. The third lesson is about the courage required to start over when your vision diverges from the path your organization is taking. Dario had reached the top of his field at OpenAI. He was vice president of research at one of the most prestigious AI labs in the world. He had resources, talented colleagues, important work. Walking away from that to start a new company with uncertain prospects required conviction and courage. Many people in similar situations would have stayed, rationalizing that they could influence direction from within, that the benefits of the resources and platform outweighed the costs of compromising on vision. Dario chose differently. He decided that the divergence was fundamental enough that building separately was necessary. This willingness to incur personal and professional costs to pursue what he believed was right is rare and admirable. The fourth lesson is about building institutions and cultures that embody values. Anthropic isn't just Dario's ideas. It's an organization with thousands of employees, billions of dollars in resources, partnerships around the world. Creating an institution that maintains mission focus as it scales is extraordinarily difficult. The pressures toward short-term thinking, toward doing what competitors do, toward prioritizing growth over values, are immense. Dario approached this challenge systematically. The public benefit corporation structure legally required considering societal impact alongside financial returns. The long-term benefit trust ensured safety voices would always have influence on governance. The emphasis on hiring people who genuinely cared about the mission, not just the technology. The cultural norms around debate and intellectual rigor. All of these were institutional design choices aimed at making sure Anthropic could maintain its orientation towards safety even as it grew. Whether these measures will prove sufficient over decades remains to be seen. But the attempt itself, the recognition that values don't automatically persist as organizations scale and the deliberate effort to design structures that support those values, is instructive for anyone trying to build lasting institutions. The fifth lesson is about communication and the importance of clarity about both possibilities and uncertainties. Dario has been remarkably clear in his public communication about what he believes, why he believes it, and where he's uncertain. When he predicts transformative AI could arrive by 2027, he explains the reasoning based on scaling laws while acknowledging the prediction could be wrong. When discussing AI risks, he distinguishes between near-term harms and speculative long-term threats while explaining why both deserve attention. This clarity is powerful. It allows productive disagreement. People can point to specific claims or reasoning steps they question rather than arguing past each other based on vague concerns or promises. It builds trust even with people who reach different conclusions, because they can see the thought process. And it models intellectual honesty, the willingness to admit uncertainty rather than pretending to know more than you do. In a field often characterized by hype and fearmongering, by grandiose claims and apocalyptic warnings, Dario's measured, evidence-based communication stands out. It represents a better way to discuss transformative technology, one grounded in what we know and clear about what we don't. These lessons, drawn from Dario's journey, apply far beyond artificial intelligence. Anyone working on ambitious problems, anyone trying to develop powerful technologies responsibly, anyone attempting to build institutions with lasting values, can learn from his example. As we close this story, it's worth reflecting on the broader significance of what Dario and his generation of AI researchers are doing. They are not just building software or running businesses. They are shaping the relationship between humanity and intelligence itself. For all of human history until now, intelligence has been exclusively biological. It emerged through evolution. It resided in brains. The smartest entities were human beings, or perhaps certain animals with specialized capabilities. That's changing. For the first time, we're creating non-biological intelligence. Systems that can learn, reason, and solve problems in ways that increasingly resemble and sometimes exceed human capabilities. This is a fundamental shift in the nature of what exists on Earth. It's not like previous technological revolutions. The printing press, the steam engine, computers, all were tools that extended human capabilities but remained under direct human control and couldn't think for themselves. AI is different. It has a degree of autonomy, of capability to act and decide without moment-to-moment human direction. As these systems become more capable, that autonomy increases. We're moving toward a world where much of what happens is the result not just of human choices but of choices made by AI systems operating based on objectives humans set but through methods humans may not fully understand. This transition, from a world where all intelligence was human to a world where much intelligence is artificial, is arguably the most significant change in human affairs since the agricultural or industrial revolutions. It will reshape economy, culture, politics, and the fundamental experience of being human. What it means to work, to learn, to create, to connect, all of this will be transformed as AI becomes ubiquitous. The people steering this transition, people like Dario Amodei, carry enormous responsibility. The choices they make about how to develop AI, what values to encode, who benefits, what safeguards to implement, these choices ripple across the entire future. Get it right, and we might see an era of unprecedented flourishing. Scientific discoveries accelerating. Diseases cured. Poverty reduced. Human creativity enhanced. Get it wrong, and we could see concentration of power, loss of agency, catastrophic accidents, or deliberate misuse causing immense harm. Dario seems deeply aware of this responsibility. It's evident in how he talks about AI, in the institutions he's built, in the choices he's made to prioritize safety even at commercial cost. Whether his particular approaches are correct, whether constitutional AI and responsible scaling policies and all the other mechanisms Anthropic has developed will prove sufficient, we don't yet know. But the fact that he's trying, that he's taking the responsibility seriously, that he's building organizations oriented toward long-term good rather than short-term gain, this matters enormously. History will judge whether Dario Amodei and his colleagues at Anthropic succeeded in their mission. Whether they managed to develop powerful AI while keeping it safe. Whether they distributed benefits broadly or concentrated them narrowly. Whether they maintained their values as commercial pressures mounted. Whether their caution was wisdom or timidity, their optimism justified or naive. But we can already judge that they asked the right questions. They took seriously the challenge of building transformative technology responsibly. They invested heavily in understanding risks and developing safeguards. They created institutions designed to maintain mission focus over decades. They contributed ideas and frameworks that shaped how the entire field thinks about AI safety. In the early 2000s and 20s, when AI was transitioning from narrow tools to potentially transformative systems, when the path forward was unclear and the stakes were rising, Dario Amodei stood up and said, "We need to be thoughtful about this. We need to build safety in from the beginning. We need to consider long-term implications, not just short-term capabilities. We need to be honest about uncertainties and trade-offs. We need institutions that can maintain these commitments as technology advances." That voice, that perspective, that example, they added something valuable to the conversation about humanity's future. They represented a path, perhaps not the only possible path but a genuine alternative, for how we might navigate the challenges ahead. And so we end where we began, with a child born in San Francisco on New Year's Day 1983, entering a world on the cusp of the personal computer revolution. That child would grow up to stand at the center of an even more profound revolution, the emergence of artificial intelligence. He would help shape how that revolution unfolded, what values guided it, what safeguards protected against its risks. The story of Dario Amodei is ultimately a story about responsibility. About someone who saw both the immense promise and the genuine dangers of powerful technology and dedicated his life to trying to maximize the first while minimizing the second. About someone who built institutions, developed ideas, and set examples aimed at steering toward a future where artificial intelligence truly benefits humanity. Whether he will succeed, whether any of us will succeed in navigating this transition well, remains an open question. The future is not yet written. The choices ahead will determine which possibilities become realities. But because people like Dario Amodei have asked the right questions, built thoughtful institutions, and insisted on taking safety seriously, we have at least a fighting chance of getting it right. And perhaps that's the most we can ask. Not certainty. Not guarantees. But a genuine effort, pursued with intelligence, integrity, and care, to shape the future well. The story of Dario Amodei reminds us that individuals matter, that choices matter, that how we develop technology matters just as much as whether we develop it. As artificial intelligence continues its advance, as the systems grow more capable and more deeply integrated into human civilization, we will need that reminder. We will need people who insist on responsibility alongside innovation, who build institutions to maintain values across decades, who think carefully about implications rather than just rushing to be first. We will need the example Dario has set, the path he has tried to chart, even as we adapt and improve on his approaches. The machines are coming. The machines are already here. Whether they become machines of loving grace or something else entirely depends on choices humans make today and in the years immediately ahead. Dario Amodei has spent his career trying to ensure those choices are made wisely. History will judge how well he and his generation succeeded. But the effort itself, the commitment to trying, is already meaningful and valuable. This is the story of Dario Amodei. A physicist who became a neuroscientist, who became an AI researcher, who became an entrepreneur trying to steer the development of artificial intelligence toward beneficial outcomes. A story still unfolding. A story whose full significance won't be clear for years or decades. But a story that matters, because it's about one person's attempt to ensure that as we create new forms of intelligence, we do so in ways that honor what's best about human values and aspirations. The future Dario is working toward, the machines of loving grace watching over us with care, remains a hope rather than a certainty. But hopes matter. Visions matter. The effort to realize positive visions while avoiding negative ones matters. And in that effort, in that work, Dario Amodei has made contributions that will influence how artificial intelligence shapes human destiny for generations to come.